Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are coming in from. My name is Katrina, and I'm part of the team here at Remo. And we have an amazing presentation for you guys today about the strategies for higher education's post-COVID future with Dr. Thomas Cavanagh, who we are so excited to have speak with us. But before we begin, I just do want to make sure that I'm coming in loud and clear. So if you guys can hear me, down in the lower right-hand corner, there's some hand claps, there's a thumbs up, there's a little like questiony face. If you can hit one of those to let me know that you guys can hear me. If you could say hello inside the chat is on the right-hand side of the screen. I am coming to you from sunny, beautiful San Diego, California this morning. So if you'd like to say hello and let us know where you're coming from, Sarah, I'm not sure if you're in Florida, but you did put the Go UFC Knights. So from Jamaica, Portland, Oregon, San Diego. All right, San Diego, we're neighbors. This is really awesome whenever I find people from San Diego, because we have people from all over the globe that come to these events. So before we start, I do want to point out that we do have some folks here that may have questions, and I don't want to get those questions lost in the general chat. So we have a Q&A feature. If you click on that Q&A feature, you can type in your question, and I'm doing that right now. You can ask your question, and then if somebody has asked the same question that you have, you can go in there and you can click the upvote, and it will rise all the way to the top, so we know that that's a question we want to prioritize during the Q&A portion. So welcome to our presentation, and without much further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Cavanagh. So Dr. Cavanagh is the Vice Provost for Digital Learning at University of Central Florida. In this role, he oversees the distance learning strategy, policies, and practices of one of the nation's largest universities. Dr. Cavanagh is also an award-winning instructional designer, program manager, and administrator. His experience has earned him positions on numerous state and national online learning boards and has made him a frequent presenter at industry conferences. His research interests include e-learning, technical communication, the societal influence of technology on education, training, culture, and commerce. So at this time, I would love to welcome Dr. Cavanagh onto the stage. Oops.
Thanks, Katrina. I don't know if you can see or hear me yet.
We can see you, but the camera, we're having with the camera.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can
There
try
we go.
this one. This one's not as good.
There we
I
go.
changed my devices. So thank you for the kind introduction. I'm going to be sharing my screen anyway, so you won't be looking at my face. But thank you for the introduction, and let me go ahead and get started. Okay, I assume you all can see that, I hope. And as Katrina said, my role is as Vice Provost for Digital Learning at the University of Central Florida. And I can tell you a little bit more about UCF, but first, we've all been through this COVID pandemic and pivot to emergency remote instruction over the past year and a half or so. And I'm not sure every institution in the country, kind of had an intentional online learning strategy prior to the pandemic. I think it was forced on a lot of institutions. Here at UCF, we're fortunate in that this is our 25th year of doing online learning. So we had a kind of a long history and a mature infrastructure, kind of a faculty-centered online learning process that put us in a good position. And I'm going to talk about some of that now as something of a case study to help you think about your own institutions going forward, especially if you're in a situation where you feel like maybe your school didn't necessarily have as intentional an online learning strategy going forward, or in the past prior to the pandemic, that going forward, you may want to think about it in the way that we've thought about it over the past 25 years or so. So let me just explain a little bit about online learning at UCF. As Katrina said, we are one of the largest institutions in the country. We are 70,000 students this fall. As of this fall, 55%, actually 55.4% of our credit hours as of this moment are digital this fall. That includes online and blended. So it's a huge component of our access mission. So kind of starting from the bottom and moving up, we have online courses that any student can take, regardless if you're a face-to-face or an online student. We have fully online programs that includes students from all over the country and in fact, all over the world. Something we call mixed mode, which is our term for blended learning. We started doing blended learning before there was a term, blended learning. So we call it mixed mode, that where part of the course is online, part is face-to-face. We do have some lecture capture, which sort of helped prepare us for some of the pivot to emergency remote instruction. And then of course, web enhanced. Even our face-to-face classes have web components, and it's pretty hard to do anything at UCF or probably any sort of modern university without touching the internet. On top of that, we've got all kinds of different innovative initiatives that we're working on, things such as adaptive learning and learning analytics. And some of those are run through at the very top of this pyramid, a program management office that we've established that we call the Pegasus Innovation Lab, that is designed to seed and scale innovative projects that start as pilots, but then have the potential to have impact across the institution. So we like to think of our online learning initiative through the lens of the Iron Triangle. And the Iron Triangle is the interconnected bars of quality, cost, and access. And the theory is that you cannot positively impact any one of those without negatively impacting the other. So for example, if you wanted to improve quality, you will reduce access and increase cost. And our theory is that by breaking the paradigm a little bit through innovative use of technology, such as online learning, we can positively impact all three of the bars of the Iron Triangle simultaneously, just by doing things a little bit differently. And I'm going to talk about each one of those dimensions a little bit separately. Let's start with access. So I mentioned the fresh numbers, even more fresh than when I prepared this slide deck. So in the pre-COVID year, we were at 49.5% of total credit hours online or blended, and 33% fully online student credit hours. As I mentioned, we're at 55.4% this semester of online or blended. And if you can look at the bottom there, 86.6% of our students took at least one online or blended course through the academic year of 1920. Almost 75% of our students took at least one fully online course. And most students, if they're taking one, they're taking more than one at the same time. So it's really critical for us in serving our students anywhere, anytime, in the best possible way. These are different colleges and schools at the university who have embraced digital learning as part of their strategic mission. So those in the left side of this column are those that do over 50% of their credit hours annually online or blended. And the ones on the right are those between 25 and 49%. And you can see our hospitality college, our Rosen College of Hospitality Management, which is literally one of the best in the world, does over 80% of its annual credit hours online or blended. And a large percentage of that is blended learning, which we have found, I'll talk about this a little bit later, to be among our most successful modalities. So here's what we look like over the past several years. This is student credit hours at UCF. We're actually at about 70,000 students this semester. We were actually 73 during the pandemic. Going from the bottom up, the sort of purple is face-to-face instruction. The kind of orangey color is blended learning. Green and that sort of gray are various video modalities, and the light blue at the top is our fully online as delivered through our learning management system. And you can see where the growth of the university has come from over the past several years. And that 55.4% we are in fall of 2021. you might be looking at that strange pink triangle at the bottom right. That's COVID. That's our emergency remote instruction. Those are courses that should have been face-to-face that we pivoted to video, synchronous video primarily during the pandemic. And a lot of those have gone back to face-to-face this semester. So what would we be without online learning? We estimate somewhere around 44,000 students potentially. It's significantly less, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000 or more students fewer. It's about access for us, and so it's really that access dimension of the Iron Triangle. Another metric that we look at is exclusively online students. So this is not blended. This is just fully online students, and that number has consistently gone up semester over semester. You can see that where it spikes every third term, that's the summer. So every summer term, we have way more students online than we do in the fall or the spring. But even in those semesters, it goes up. Typically over 40% of our students are online in a summer term, and we run a pretty full summer term. I haven't put anything beyond spring 2020 just because last year was so anomalous. It would basically be 100% online, and we'll have to figure out how to factor those numbers into this trend. But we're kind of back on this normal growth trajectory for the fall of 2021. If we look at the fall of 2019 student headcount, this is one way of examining those students. So again, this is just headcount. This is not credit hours. But if we look at headcount, the yellow circle represents students here on the main campus. The green circle represents students on our Rosen campus of hospitality management. It's a separate campus down by the attractions here in Orlando. The red circle is our regional campuses, which are mostly co-located with partner community and state colleges around Central Florida. There's 10 of those. And then the blue circle represents our online students. And I have a sequence of these charts going back to the fall of 2009, and it's remarkable to see the growth of online. It's exploded over those past 10 years or so, and it's interesting too to note student behavior when you look at a chart like this. So, for example, if you look at the intersection of the three circles towards the bottom, there were 350 students in the fall of 2019 who took a face-to-face class on the main campus, a class on one of our regional campuses, and an online class in the same semester. And what we might find is that same student might, in a different term, be in a different part of this Venn diagram. Their work schedule might change, or they might have an illness, or they have a childcare issue. So they might go to the fully right side of this chart and do a semester completely online. But then a course opens up with a professor that they want to take on campus. So then they'll move maybe into that intersecting area of the blue and the yellow charts, or the yellow circles, where maybe they're taking some face-to-face and some online in the same semester. Our blended courses are in the yellow circle because they do represent some on-campus instruction. So what we find is that from semester to semester, students will swirl throughout the different parts of this chart in order to accommodate their own academic and personal requirements. And we feel like that giving students that kind of agency helps with retention and helps them with their academic progression. And again, it's part of our access strategy. UCF Online is our fully virtual online campus, and that has a subset of the fully online student population. So I think you may have seen in any given semester, especially in the summer, we could have 17 or 18,000 students who are 100% online. This is the subset of that population that is part of UCF Online, who are in exclusively online programs, who may not even be in the state, who might not even be in the country. We have just a handful of students who are outside the country. And you can see how that has grown over the years. Right now, I think we are at about 6,600, 6,700 this spring, fully online students in UCF Online, split between undergraduate and graduate. Within the state of Florida, you can see that we're sort of spread throughout. And in any given semester, we might be in any given county in the state. Our highest concentration is around Central Florida. You can see that that represents about 46%, the 11 counties of Central Florida, 46% of our UCF online enrollment. Another 45% are elsewhere in Florida. And actually, as of this term, we're at about 10% out of state currently for UCF Online. So for us, it's again about our access mission, serving as a public institution in the state of Florida, serving our residents. Our demographics, again, this is an access measure. Our students in UCF Online tend to be older and more female than our regular student population on campus. We have more women on campus as students than men anyway, but it's just much more acute online. And you can see these percentages at the graduate level, it's over 73%, and at the undergraduate level, it's over 77% for female versus male. And then you can see the ages that it skews much older than the traditional 18 to 24-year-old population. So that's a little bit about access. Let's talk about quality. So we've been tracking for literally 25 years the success of students based upon their modalities and comparing, whether or not they can proceed in their majors, which is a metric of success. So when we say success in this particular context, we're talking about did they earn a grade of C or better so that they could progress in their major. And what we find, I could show you any term going back to 1996, and it would look very similar to this, that the blended courses, what we call mixed mode, but our blended courses outperform face-to-face and fully online. It tends to be our most successful modality. It combines the best of both worlds, the conveniences of online learning, but also a lot of the connections of face-to-face instruction. But coming in second is our fully online courses, and then what we find is our face-to-face courses come after that. If you were going to look at this in a statistical analysis, we really kind of find that there's no statistical difference between the face-to-face and fully online. And I will say that our lecture capture courses kind of come in under this, so they don't perform as well as face-to-face, and we've been actually trying to redesign a number of those recently. Likewise, blended courses have the lowest withdrawal rates, with face-to-face and fully online about the same. None of them are terrible. They're all under 5% and traditionally have been for that 26-year or 25-year period going back to 1996. And then another measure we look at when we're talking about quality is end of course evaluations, what we call our student perception of instruction. One indicator question is the rating of the faculty member by modality, and the percentage of students who rated that faculty member excellent. And you can see it breaks down by modality where again, blended learning comes out on top, followed by fully online, face-to-face, and then our lecture capture modalities. We also try to look at how our fully online students in fully online programs as part of our UCF virtual campus do, and we find that they fare very well in comparison to similar students who are on campus. They tend to succeed at a higher rate when it comes to GPA, class completion, retention, and persistence. All of that is comparable or better to similar populations on campus. Grades, when we look at UCF online grades versus non-UCF online students, they tend to do a little bit better, which kind of mirrors some of the previous slides I showed you where the online students tend to actually outperform a little bit when it comes to success, the face-to-face students. This chart is actually pulled, this and the next chart come from a study that was done by the Boston Consulting Group, funded by the Gates Foundation, to do an analysis of various institutions that are deeply embedded in digital learning. And this was one of the things that we actually learned about ourselves, that the percentage of credit hours being taught by adjuncts online, in some cases is actually lower than the percentage of credit hours being taught by adjuncts face-to-face at UCF, which is interesting and not necessarily the narrative that you hear about online learning. Excuse me. It's also, in our case, we feel an indicator of quality. because the same faculty, tenure track faculty who are teaching on campus are also teaching online. It's the same course outcomes. It's the same activities in many cases, just kind of customized for the web. This is not just an adjunct operation at UCF. It's really mainstreamed into the academic enterprise, and we feel like that's a quality differentiator for us. And as a result, what we find is that in this particular measure, another thing we learned in this Boston Consulting Group study is that the achievement gaps for our Pell eligible and minority students are actually reduced in our blended and online courses compared to our face-to-face courses. It's a small difference, but it's there. And again, that's not typically what you hear about online and blended courses, where sometimes, I've read plenty of things that said that the performance is lower, especially for these populations, but that's not the case here. Another thing that underpins our quality initiative is part of our Center for Distributed Learning, which is sort of the production and design arm of all of our online courses. We've got this quality circle. It begins with planning and credentialing and compliance at the top, leads into our faculty development initiatives, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Course design, every faculty member has an assigned instructional designer. Then course production, we've got a full production house. The Center for Distributed Learning has about 90 to 100 people who are dedicated to building and delivering and supporting online courses. So production includes everything from graphics to, we've got a full video studio and a video team. We've got programmers, and moving on to technical support, we've got a full help desk that helps online faculty and students. And then we assess everything. We actually have a dedicated team who does nothing but assess the efficacy and feeds that back into the planning and compliance and course design. Overall, within the division, we've got about 180 people, and close to 100 of them are in the Center for Distributed Learning alone. We've got a number of different faculty development programs. Each one of them serves a different purpose, whether it's to prepare faculty to design and develop original online courses, to help them deconstruct and teach a course that they're inheriting from someone else, to teach lecture capture courses, which came in really handy during the pandemic, pivot to emergency remote instruction, and all kinds of other ad hoc open labs and other kinds of seminars and instruction. Our flagship course takes about 80 hours of contact time to complete. The one where you are inheriting a course from someone else and you have to kind of deconstruct that and figure out how to teach it yourself, that takes about 35 hours to teach. And as I said, the vast majority of our folks who are teaching online are full-time faculty members. So our flagship course, the one that takes 80 hours to complete, is something we call IDL 6543. It is taught in a blended format over 10 weeks, where we put faculty in the position of being an online student. There's an online component, there's a face-to-face component, and then there are structured consultations with an assigned instructional designer. And our instructional designers are actually in-unit full-time faculty members. They're non-instructional, non-tenure, but they are faculty, like librarians or clinical research faculty are. And they work as a peer in a consultative way alongside the teaching faculty to help them design the best possible online course. You can see some of the subjects that are taught through these 10 weeks. And it culminates in this showcase where the faculty get to present what they've built as part of this process. And we invite the deans and the provost and all kinds of other chairs and colleagues to attend that showcase where they can show what they've learned. So finally, let's talk about cost, which is the third dimension of the Iron Triangle. That is a view from above of the UCF campus. And if we were going to build all of the classrooms that we would need to serve all of the students that we are currently serving digitally, it would cost us, we estimate, and this was done a couple of years ago, upwards of $200 million to build just the classroom spaces. And I'm not even talking about the parking decks and the dorms and the cafeterias and other kinds of ancillary services that would be necessary. That's really just classroom space to serve the students that are currently being served online. So think about the kind of access that creates. And if we were going to run those buildings that we didn't have to build, we're looking at over $7 million a year in plant operations and maintenance that we don't have to expend. It's an awful lot of access that has been created for students without the hard infrastructure campus investment that is necessary when you're thinking about more traditional ways of delivering instruction. This is kind of what I mean about impacting all three dimensions of that iron triangle simultaneously. If you think differently, we're able to increase access without increasing cost. This is an example of that. Another cost measure is time to graduation, because it's an opportunity cost for students. The longer they're in school, the later it is that they're going to be able to be in the workforce earning. And what we find is that on average, the more online courses you take in your academic career, the faster you graduate. And so that's an advantage to students. Again, if they can swirl through that Venn diagram, they can continue making progress. And then for UCF Online, our virtual campus, what we find is that a lot of the students are not interested in coming on campus because they're busy, they've got work and family commitments. So we've structured it so that those students, if they choose to be in a fully online program through UCF Online, do not have to pay campus-based fees. So they're not paying the transportation fee, they're not paying the athletic fee, they're not paying the student activities fee. All of those go to campus-based fees have been waived for students who are exclusively online. And in exchange for that, they're given these significant savings. The tuition's the same because it's the same course, the same faculty, the same outcomes, but they're not paying these campus-based fees. So you can see for an in-state student, there's significant savings for undergraduate and graduate students. And then they are actually prohibited from taking face-to-face courses, but in most cases, the students are perfectly fine with that because they might not even be anywhere within close driving range of UCF, and they're willing to take that deal to not take face-to-face classes in exchange for, a 22% savings in their out-of-pocket costs. So let me just reflect kind of as a last comment on what post-COVID considerations might be as we think about the future. So for us, during that initial spring, like so many of you, we had to quickly pivot within about 3 days. So many students and courses to emergency remote instruction. We went from teaching 200,000 credit hours online to 700,000 credit hours online in about 2 or 3 days. We trained over 300 faculty in about 3 weeks to teach in online format, and that was but also including the development of a new course that can handle that kind of scale, because the ones that I shared with you are not designed for 300 people. One of the things that I think will linger as a enduring practice as a result of COVID is synchronous online instruction. To be honest, it's not something we did very much of prior to the pandemic, but it is a practice that that became ubiquitous during the pandemic, and we are continuing it going forward. What we're trying to do now, though, is put the same quality infrastructure behind synchronous online instruction that we've had for 25 years of asynchronous online instruction. And so we've stood up a faculty committee to help us think through what kind of training, what kind of assessment, what kind of platforms, because we've been using Zoom and other kinds of meeting platforms, which are not optimized for instruction. They're great for meetings, but maybe not necessarily for instruction. And there are new platforms that are emerging, and we are actually piloting several of them this fall to see if there's maybe a tool that better suits our needs. And then maybe finally, and maybe all of you are dealing with this as well, there have become a lot newer expectations around remote work and hybrid work. And we are experimenting right now with a majority hybrid workforce where our staff are working remotely a majority of the time, a minimum of, in most cases, 3 days a week out of the office, 2 days in the office. And we're trying to navigate the best use of those two spaces for collaboration and for more dedicated work. We found that we could be really effective remote during the pandemic. And how do we keep that going, yet not lose the kind of collaboration and esprit de corps and culture that we want by coming together? And we're still figuring that out. But I do think that is a reality going forward. So I hope that this framing, the iron triangle framing, which is really important to how we think about things here at the Division of Digital Learning at UCF, is useful for you as you think about kind of your post-COVID online strategies. And with the time we have left, I'm happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that really awesome lecture and explanation about how you guys are doing things there at your university. We do have some questions for you. So again, as we're having this Q&A, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you can put them inside the Q&A tab, it's going to be easier for us to find them. So that way they don't get lost in the chat. But first question comes from Matt Alex. He says that higher education is designed around degree paths. So how can this online strategy unbundle education to provide access for more students and learners that don't necessarily need a 4-year degree?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's also something we're working on with our continuing education division. How do you find sort of those short courses and kind of just-in-time training? And I do think you can fit that kind of an approach in the Iron Triangle framework. So, I mean, you're talking about probably things that cost less because they're maybe shorter, that have greater access, and you, of course, you want to have it a high quality. It's not something that was a huge emphasis during COVID for us. We were really just trying to keep the university running and deliver instruction. But we are turning our attention to that now as we look at more on the non-credit side of things for us. I recognize that there are institutions that are doing some of this on the credit side, so like stackable credentials and badges and other kinds of credentials that might be a little more non-traditional, involving competency-based education, prior learning assessment. All of that are all of those kinds of innovations are, I think, should be encouraged, and there are things that we're looking at. We just in those particular areas, I think, are maybe behind some other schools that are really being innovative in the space.
So you mentioned something there, and I'm going to pivot into a different question. You had mentioned the emergency, you titled the emergency remote instruction. So was your pivot to offer more of the online classes or more of the virtual instructions planned prior to COVID, or did you become reactionary because of the circumstances?
Well, as I said, we've got 25 years of history doing online learning, and we were doing 200,000 credit hours online before the pandemic. So we had a mature, robust online learning enterprise, faculty centered prior to the pandemic. But when the pandemic hit, it happened to be that we were in the middle of a strategic initiative that was funded by our board of trustees, something we called the Digital Learning Course Redesign Initiative. And it was a way for us to kind of evangelize online learning in some of the parts of the university that we're a little slower to adopt it, mostly in the STEM field, some of the hard sciences, engineering. And we had been making great progress with them, mostly with blended learning. We had trained a lot of faculty and had done some course buyouts to allow them to kind of innovate and experiment. And what we heard from a lot of those faculty is when the pandemic hit and they had to pivot to remote instruction, that digital learning initiative, that redesign initiative, was extremely valuable to them because it prepared them in order to rapidly respond to the new reality of having to teach 100% remote. Not every faculty had that benefit, but there were a lot that were able to, I think, have a couple of steps head start on the rest of the faculty. And then, of course, we had existing faculty development programs, some of the things I shared, and we were able to quickly revise those so that we could handle the scale that we were getting. That IDL 6543 course that I mentioned, it's won all kinds of awards. It's 10 weeks long. It's really intense. And a lot of faculty tell us it's among the best professional development workshops that they've ever been through. But it's designed for 40 faculty, which is kind of the limit that our instructional design staff can kind of handle based on scale. And we had over 300 requests for a program that handles 40. So we had to quickly revise that to handle the kind of scale we were getting during the pandemic. But we had the advantage of having the assets in place because of our history. So I think that we had a little bit of a head start, but that's not to say we didn't have to work pretty hard to deliver it at the scale that we needed.
Awesome. And then we have another question that came into the chat, and I think I can revise it just a little bit. So you had talked about how this was successful for UCF and the plans that you guys have laid for your success. So what are some of the larger implications for other universities? How can other universities take the groundbreaking work that you've done and the lessons learned that you guys have learned and apply that to their own programs?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I'll go back to what I said sort of at the beginning. There are a lot of schools, I suspect, that probably didn't have an online learning strategy. Maybe they had some experimentation and some faculty that were doing some things, but they didn't have an institutional strategy for online learning. And as we think about larger implications going forward, I think it's probably a risk for any institution to not have an online strategy at this point. And that doesn't mean it has to be core, right? Every institution has a different mission. You know, if you're a liberal arts school or military academy or art school or something, you know, there's a reason why you would want to be in person, and that's core to who you are. But I think it's probably irresponsible to not at least say, okay, if we had to do this again, what infrastructure do we need to have in place now? What opportunities are there online that doesn't compromise the core values and mission of our type of institution? I think it's just part of the educational landscape now. And looking at it through that iron triangle has been really useful for us. And ultimately, ask yourself why, right? How does online learning fit what your goals are? What are your institutional goals? And frankly, it shouldn't just be revenue. It shouldn't, you'll notice revenue wasn't in any of the iron triangle. If you do it right and you do it well, and you do it for the right reasons, hopefully the revenue should just take care of itself. It should be mission oriented. And I would encourage you to do that, because just having an online program right now is not a differentiator. Every institution has an online program. Maybe there was a time where you could put something online, and because you had it online, students would come to you because there weren't that many options. Now they can go anywhere they want. So I think it really needs to tie to the quality and what's special about your school that you can make it unique.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We just have a couple more minutes for Q&A, and there's one that's risen to the top. So how are you making sure that campus life and social interactions are also fulfilled, which these things are very important for mental health and networking when you're looking at the online courses or the online models?
Sure. All right. So let me make sure I differentiate. We have two different kinds of student populations. UCF Online, which is our online virtual campus, is for students who want to be exclusively online. And that's about 10% of the total university headcount right now. And we literally, so I'm sitting in Orlando, Florida. We have students in Alaska. And so they're not coming to campus. That's 10% of the university. 90% of the university is on campus, and they are participating in campus life. And they're choosing to supplement their course selections, think about that Venn diagram I showed, with online options. And what we hear often from students is that online learning, somewhat counterintuitively, gives them the flexibility to engage deeper in the on-campus experience because it gives them schedule flexibility. So we have like our president of student government in the past has had 100% online courses so that she can participate in statewide meetings and be involved with student government. We have students who are involved with Greek life or intercollegiate athletes or others that online learning actually allows them to be a more active participant in the campus experience. And I'm not at all suggesting that online learning should replace what's happening on campus. What I'm saying is that we should give students choices and that not every student is the same. The 40-year-old nurse who works I'll talk like my mom, who went back to school when she was in her 40s and became a nurse and worked the graveyard shift in a critical care unit there's no way she could go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 o'clock in the morning if she wanted to go and advance her education. That kind of a student needs a certain kind of online flexibility that an 18-year-old living in a fraternity house on campus doesn't need. And I think we need to accommodate both of them. And online learning can be pointed at them to solve different problems.
Thank you for that. Just have another minute or so before we need to go back down into networking. And there's a few questions here about Remo that I can go ahead and take if that's okay with you. So
Sure.
There's questions about how does Remo blend remote experience with live audience? How does university use Remo? How can individual lecturers manage the costs of using Remo? So the one thing, and I wanted to dovetail on that last question, is the way that a lot of universities, whether they're online or in person, they're using Remo to really enhance that social interaction, whether folks are, one student's in Alaska, one's in New York, one's in Florida, because it is an online gathering place where it's a little bit more humanistic. You can have real social interactions. We've had UCLA use the platform. They used it for their alumni reunions, where they had a floor plan that recreated their campus. So they had one of their main buildings, they had all the UCLA colors and things that were familiar in the space. And each one of the classes that was being celebrated, they had their own break-off buildings after their main events. We have student recruitment. We have the ability to do the career fairs that students may or may not be able to get to in person, and a variety of other different use cases where you can really bring that social interaction together. And especially since we're not sure what's going to be happening in the future with COVID and with the Delta variant, if things need to revert back. We also know that international students have a hard time traveling, sometimes even geopolitical, they have a hard time getting visas. So this has been a platform that a lot of universities have used to erase those geopolitical barriers. So there's a lot of things that we have solutions for. When it comes to the costs, and when it comes to blending the virtual and the live audience, we have been doing a lot of improvements for that hybrid type of event. But I'm not going to belabor a lot of it. We do have a lot of our Remo folks here who we would love to talk to you as we go into conversation mode and answer some of your questions a little bit more one-on-one. But I would just like to wrap up by saying, thank you so very much for coming and delivering this, because there is so much information that I received that I'm now completely rethinking some certain strategies that I'm even using for some online education. But is there any last parting words or words of wisdom or guidance to anyone who may be looking to model some of the things that you guys are doing?
Yeah, let me just underscore that I really think that whatever you're doing with online learning should be aligned with institutional mission, and at the end of the day, it should be ultimately in the service of students. So, look at student needs. Look, every a community college student population is very different from a liberal arts student population, or Ivy League versus some smaller regional comprehensive. You can design programs to serve your particular audience and to fulfill your mission, and just make sure you stay true to that.
Thank you so much. One thing I did forget, and I'm so sorry for this, one of the largest uses so far has been poster sessions. So poster sessions hosted on a virtual platform have been extremely successful. So with that, if does anybody have any last questions that are burning that you'd like to ask now to the group? Otherwise, we're going to go back into conversation mode, where Dr. Cavanagh, I believe you'll be able to hang around for a couple minutes at a table and discuss with anyone who'd like to talk a little bit more one-on-one. If you'd like to talk more Remo, there are a number of us in here who are represented from Remo. We have the little Remo banner at the bottom of our avatars. But thank you guys so much for coming, and I really appreciate the time, Dr. Cavanagh, that you've given to us today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.